John Jones the Martian Manhunter isn't the only or the first Martian superhero from DC Comics, as he'd make his debut in Detective Comics issue 225 from 1955. Before that, we had Marsboy from Superboy issue 14 from 1951, the late golden age of comics, a very interesting story to say the least, and Marsboy would actually reappear 2 more times. So let's talk about this very short history of a once Marsboy, the Martian no one remembers. Although he's technically not a Martian, he just lives on Mars. This Superboy series isn't John Kent or Connor Kent, but a young Clark Kent, when he was a kid. In the pre-crisis canon, Clark had been a superhero from the near start, being Superboy while he was in high school in Smallville. This comic in concept would heavily influence the 80s Superboy show, which is a direct adaptation, which is actually a bit of an awkward time because the TV series was coming out at the exact same time the comics dubbed it a bit too silly and removed it from canon post-crisis. So as the show was coming out, the comics was removing it from Superman lore. The Superboy concept was also slightly influential to the show Smallville, but mainly only in spirit as having a young Clark Kent, not a Superboy. Although he did become the Blur, which I guess kinda is his version of Superboy in this universe, as he was a superhero before becoming Superman. But I don't think that was intentional. Marsboy appears in the first story of this issue, which I must say is really messy with some pretty big flaws and strange character choices that feel a bit questionable morally wise for both Marsboy and Superboy. Also, I love Marsboy's costume. I know the skirt is a reference to Roman togas, but it's a very out there for the time look. Even now would likely be met with some assholes. There's also some pretty questionable panels that I think I might be either reading into things, or perhaps writer Kurt Swan did it on purpose. I'll let you decide. We start our story on Mars with Suttree, or Surdry? I don't know how to pronounce his name, I'm going with Suttree, who's on a ledge where he finds himself in the crosshairs with media radiation that makes him feel queer all over. Don't you hate it when radiation turns you gay? This radiation doesn't just turn him queer, but also gives him superpowers, super hearing and supervision. Suttree leaps up at the meteor and destroys it, saving Mars and proving he's invulnerable and can fly. This was the origin of Marsboy, as we see Suttree take up the identity and don the cape and skirt, deciding to hide his real identity to avoid his family and loved ones from being harmed. What loved ones? What villains? I don't know. What is he scared of? Years later, Mars would be at risk. Of what? I don't know, because there's literally one narrative box that says it and doesn't explain anything. Except for Marsboy wants to save Mars because, well, he's their protector. A group of scientists discover that those on Mars aren't actually native to Mars, but instead to Earth long ago, where they had hidden a way to save Mars from this upcoming crisis. Okay, but what is that? What is this thing from Earth that can save Mars from this whatever doom? Marsboy is told he has to go to Earth to steal whatever this thing is, and possibly murder Superboy because Superboy might want to stop him. Alright, sounds like a plan. Marsboy is tasked with stealing the Sphinx from Egypt, trying to throw it out of the Earth's atmosphere because the Mars gravity rays will take the Sphinx back to Mars. Marsboy, however, is hoping to avoid Superboy, but he can't. Superboy appears to catch the Sphinx and put it back, leading to two having a fight with Superboy being very confused by whatever is happening. We also get this panel. I love it. What fighting position is this? It's amazing. It's just amazing. Marsboy refuses to tell Superboy why he needs a Sphinx. Maybe you should tell him why? I feel like Superboy would rationally understand the matter is of survival, but he doesn't tell him because why would you explain anything? Why would you make things easier? Also, for whatever reason, Marsboy just decides to stay in Smallville for some time, just coincidentally the same school as Clark Kent. He goes by the name Joe Mars, and Clark is assigned to show him around his classes. Marsboy struggles in his classes because not being from Earth, he doesn't know much about its history. I mean, neither does Earth half the time, but he doesn't know what's printed in the books either. Marsboy is also too stupid to realize that cars hitting people hurt, and is nearly exposed for his powers, but is ironically saved by Superboy, who does it under the impression that it would kill Joe Mars, or at least hurt him. During a class one day, because for whatever reason Marsboy is just sticking around still, Joe uses his X-ray vision on Clark, who uses his on Joe, as they realize each other's secret identities. This leads to Marsboy just for whatever reason trying to ruin Superboy's life. Despite the fact he came to Earth to save Mars, that mission is no longer his priority, it's just to screw over Clark, trying to expose him as Superboy, but every turn Clark outsmarts him in his each predicament. This story comes to a conclusion with Marsboy trying to outsmart Clark by trapping him in a room of copper, thinking that it affects him as lead does, but he's wrong, since Marsboy was under the impression their powers were identical including their weaknesses. But they're not. Marsboy's weakness is copper, he can't see through it, but Clark can. Superboy shows up mid-Sphinx stealing to tell him that copper isn't his weakness, and that he can see a formula in the Sphinx meaning it's in a copper container since Marsboy can't see it, leading to Marsboy leaving the Sphinx on Earth and taking the container instead back to Mars, not before saying he respects Superboy and hope they'll meet again. Why? This was horrible. Why would you want to meet him again? You were horrible to Superboy. This story has many hiccups. There are many whys and hows unanswered. The best part is definitely the rivalry at school. Those scenes were low-key fun and legitimately humorous at times. But other than that, this story was very lackluster. And alone wouldn't make me want to see Marsboy again. But he would return 2 more times. But he's a lot nicer when he returns. Well, a little bit nicer when he returns. One of them, he's just a straight-up victim. He would return in Superboy issue 16 just 2 issues later from 1951. The cover isn't promoting the Marsboy story, but can we just talk about this cover story sometime? Because what is happening? Anyways, this Marsboy story starts with the idea that Marsboy hasn't had a break from being a superhero for a very long time, and thinks that being Superboy must be easier, therefore would convince Clark to swap places with him, both under the impression that the other has an easier time as a hero. Also, we get this panel where they get naked in space to exchange clothes. Did we have to have this panel displaying it? You didn't have to show this part. Anyways, they both discover that their society's evolution technology to be their main problem, not being used to it. Superboy as Marsboy destroys comments under the belief they were going to hurt the city of Mars, or city on Mars. But they are being called to Mars by scientists for experiments, which he just ruined. Marsboy as Superboy nearly lets a bunch of people in a burning balloon die because he's not used to a world where people don't just normally fly with anti-gravity belts. Superboy as Marsboy also finds an issue with the fact that he's unable to see through lead, as being a problem when he needs to search for a group of escaped pirate prisoners in a labyrinth inside a mountain. What? Okay. Needing to do a full sweep of the mountain instead of just using his X-ray vision, with there being no pirates around to be found, with the guards outside really annoyed, saying that they wasted their time waiting for Superboy as Marsboy. You asked him to do it. Don't get pissy about the method how, he still did it faster than any of you could. Marsboy is dealing with something similar as he can't see through copper, which Superboy can. Superboy, however, really screws over Marsboy. Not assuming animals on this planet be anything more than pets, he changes into Sutry in front of what he calls a dog. But the dog can talk and is excited to learn the truth. Also, that is not a dog, not even an alien dog. It looks more like the Cheshire Cat to me from Wonderland. Superboy of course feels bad and tells Marsboy. They swap back and seem to get the cat dog's credibility to be quashed. Marsboy just says he pretended to be Sutry to disguise himself. Very believable, and they actually believe it. Alright. The story ends with both young heroes considering the other to have a harder time, but would never admit that to the other. I will say I did like this story a bit more. It improved the dynamic between Clark and Sutry where they're friendly rivals, which for a pair of heroes is actually kind of fun. It can lead to funny back and forths as it did here. It is a fairly basic premise that, as of right now, we've seen countless times with Batman and Superman. However, for the time, would have been a little bit more unique. And I will say, even though it is a pretty basic idea, it does do what it sets up. It doesn't try to go for more than it actually is, which I think is typically something that basic premises need to do. Because sometimes basic stories want to be too deep or too much, and it just doesn't work. Marsboy's third and final appearance will be from Adventure Comics issue 195 from 1953, which either gives him a redesign or it's a coloring error, now replacing his original yellow and purple costume with an orange costume. He's also now a brunette. Despite this not being a Superboy comic, this is still a Superboy story. This story is about Lana not feeling loved by Superboy, so after eavesdropping on Superboy and Marsboy, she learns that Marsboy is Sutry. Although in this scenario, it's framed as if Lana knows the existence of Marsboy already, which she shouldn't unless something happened off-panel. Lana then just full-on blackmails Marsboy, first confronting him where he also knows who she is. What happened off-panel? Anyways, she asks him to pretend to be in love with her and take her to Mars so Superboy will be jealous. Marsboy at first says his time is precious, he needs to be helping to save people, not just pulling pranks. But Lana says she knows his true identity, so unless he helps, she'll tell. Who will she tell? Is Lana going to take a vacation to Mars to tell everybody? If you don't take her to Mars, she has no one to tell. Marsboy then has to do whatever she says. Lana even introduces him to her mother under the lie that he loves her and will be taking her to Mars, which her mother is understandably against. Also, Superboy is watching this for some reason. Why is he here? To just watch Lana? Lana then instructs Marsboy to show her mom his powers, and she just caves. Lana's mom looks more scared than excited, like she's only agreeing to it now because she thinks that Sutry might kill her on her daughter's orders if she says no. I say that as a joke, but I genuinely feel like Lana might do that if her mom said no. Lana is fucking scary in this story. Marsboy does take Lana to Mars, but Superboy comes along too, where Lana is just forcing Marsboy to do whatever she wants, even making him make her a new dress, or else she'll tell everybody who he is, which now she actually can because she's on Mars. Why would you take her to Mars? She then makes him make her a giant fan for her, for Superboy to watch, and I guess he's meant to be jealous. I'd be glad to have dodged this bullet of Lana Lang, and to probably be a little bit worried for my friend. Superboy then plays along, pretending to fall for a Martian girl, which makes Lana jealous. He's doing this because he already knows how Lana is, and that this is a scheme. But by doing this, she just admits it and then tries to blackmail Superboy, saying that he better never speak to this Mars girl again and take them home unless she'll reveal his friend's secret identity. Lana is now using it to force Superboy to do things, by blackmailing him through his friend. The story ends with things going back to the status quo back on Earth, that being with Superboy and Lana. Marsboy is still on Mars, with his final thought being that he's happy to know that Superboy knows how to handle Lana, because he does not. This was his last appearance, and probably because he wants nothing to do with Earth ever again after this. Just completely stopped existing because of Lana, how Lana handled the whole situation and treated him. He just didn't want to exist anymore in comics. Out of the 3 stories, I would say my favorite was the second one. However, I think out of the 3 where Marsboy comes off the most likable would be the third. I just felt bad for the guy the entire issue. Marsboy and Superboy's friendly rivalry I think is actually kind of interesting, but yet again that's a dynamic that Superman would go on to have with many other characters. Batman, Green Lantern, even Supergirl. The most memorable part about the character is likely his costume, both versions including the skirt. I think between the two, while I like the yellow one more, the orange one is likely a better option for probably an updated version of the character if he were to ever come back. I doubt he will. Unless Grant Morrison or Mark Waid decides to, because they're the only ones I think would ever bring this character back. Marsboy overall I think had a bit more potential than he was given. However, this is a big however, not a lot. The character overall was constructed as being another Superboy, and therefore the character didn't really have all that much room to grow as a character that wasn't already being done with Superboy. The character overall didn't have many qualities that were unique to him. Almost every single thing was a gimmick based on Superboy. And even then, those that were unique would go on to go to different characters like Martian Manhunter or even Supergirl. He also kind of reminds me of Mon-El, like a rip-off Mon-El, even though he came first. If he were to come back, I wouldn't complain. But at the same time, there are so many other characters from these early years I think should come back before Marsboy. And that's it. Like always, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!